Okay. Can you hear me? I don't sound nearly as loud as Craig from up here.
You have to turn the volume back up. Or you can also stand in front of mine.
Mr. Smarty Pants. Okay. So my charge is to talk about kind of the education overview, and so what I'm going to go through is for the most part our curriculum that we use in the schools, and so we put this together as to I guess to ultimately achieve the Alliance goals, and Craig talked about the goals of the Alliance was to work together to replace toxic Kentucky 31 with non-toxic endophyte. And so the schools are largely to make that successful, in that many of us or those that have participated had been a part of the endophyte-free conversion and had suffered the challenges of trying to win those customers or clients back after the conversion to endophyte-free. And so our goal was, how do we make a system that makes conversion to non-toxic novel endophyte successful? And so this is just a snapshot of the schools and the locations that Craig indicated earlier. And so we have all our schools listed, and when we tried to put together kind of a teaching model, is that we wanted to try to make it successful, but we also wanted to make it relatively short and inexpensive to do that. And so our registration is fairly inexpensive at $60, and we get everything done between 9 and 5 on one day. And so the idea behind that is it's early enough in the morning or late enough in the morning you can get there. And we tried to space the locations out so that we have southwestern Missouri, where most of our cows and forage are located in the state, as well as the deeper soils, greater water holding capacity of the Forage System Research Center. So from a school location standpoint, we tried to cover the geographic areas of the state, as well as one of the other aspects about this I think is important is all of those locations are university research farms. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but each of those are one of our locations. All of those locations have cattle on the property, and then the kind of a facility to hold the school. So again, it's a one-day school, and we tried to time those schools early in the spring, early enough that if somebody is interested in doing something, it's relatively timely information. In that the way we view the process is that really starts in the spring, getting ready for seeding next year, not the year of the initial schooling, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. Okay, and so there was much debate as we put this curriculum together as to whether we even needed to talk about Fescue Toxicosis. And many of you who have been around this education business would suggest everybody has heard about Fescue Toxicosis, and those of you who have been around it also know that very few understand it many times, and that they've heard about it but don't necessarily always understand it. And so where we start is just talking about the challenges from a reproductive standpoint in the cows. We talk about the market discounts associated with not only reduced weight gain, but rough hair coats, retention of hair, and market discounts, as well as ultimately the clinical sign of fescue foot. That's like the one time where people will admit they potentially have a problem. So we start with fescue toxicosis just to help people recognize that they do indeed need to do something. And then we do talk about, all right, if you have a potential for fescue toxicosis, how do you diagnose that this is even the correct decision to make? We don't necessarily make the assumption that everybody needs to make the conversion. We talk about the alternatives, and Craig goes through to starting out with testing to determine your infection level, and then if you do have high infection and you're unable to manage or are tired of the Band-Aids or incremental improvements as he discusses, then that the simplicity of replacing with a novel endophyte is your ultimate decision. And so this goes through kind of the decision model at the very beginning while they're at the school. And then as Craig illustrated with the cartoon, he went through this. What we spend a fair amount of time is just explaining to the client the difference. in that we make the assumption that everybody knows we're talking about a novel endophyte, but I would tell you from experience of 2 years and 6 schools now, you will still hear people talk about, now when I plant this endophyte-free variety, how do I make sure it persists? And so I would tell you, based off of our experience, you cannot review this enough, in that it is not something that is ingrained, and so we use this to kind of help them understand that we are focused on incorporating this novel endophyte, and endophyte-free is it's slightly better than this, but not much, and that becomes a problem long term. So we spend the first part of the school dealing with the problem and trying to present some alternatives, and then we start into seed quality. We think that our role of regulation, this is again just a review of our regulations, but we spend a fair amount of time talking about what it takes to get the seed to the point they are at. And the biggest reason that we spend time on this is one of the first reasons that people do not incorporate this technology is the cost of the seed. And so one of the things we think about is how do we help them understand the cost, why the cost is different from one to the other. And one of the other things from an educational standpoint we spend a fair amount of time also is why are the bags like they are, and how should they handle that seed once they take inventory of it. In that, again, if you remember, our goal is how do we make this system of conversion successful? And the first thing that Craig mentioned, he uses a vaccine example, is that how do we prevent them from killing all the endophyte that they have paid for by leaving it on the back of the truck for 2 days before they get it planted and those type of things. So our seed quality aspect that we go through is either taught by Nick Hill, and I think Chris has actually taught part of that component as well, where we talk about how that seed is produced, how it is maintained, and then the challenges that make or essentially drive much of the cost associated with it beyond just the cost of technology. Then what we try to do then is talk about, all right, how is the best method to establish this system? And as I said, we have these schools in March so that they can begin thinking about not this fall but next fall planting those forages. Because we suggest the first year is minimizing seed bank the year before. In that do not allow that seed that you're going to renovate or that field you're going to renovate to go to seed in June or July. Take a hay crop off or use some method to suppress seed head development so that when you do incorporate the new fescue, you don't have a batch of Kentucky 31 waiting to germinate at the first disturbance of the soil. And so year before planting, when we talk about establishment, Dave Davis traditionally has done this part of the discussion. We talk about seed head suppression, we talk about soil testing and fertilization and lime. In that, again, we want to go through all aspects of management that ultimately make the seeding successful, and getting all of these lined out the year before we plant is the best method. We then go through any number of smother systems, and having gone through these schools now, I will tell you is that it is much more, there are many more options or suggested options perhaps, than just a simple spray, smother, spray. And one of the aspects of this school that we've incorporated is how can we think about acres that were converted to row crops when corn was $7 and soybeans were $16 that now we realize need to be converted back, and those are actually a smother system where somebody else is taking care of the fertility in the smother crop. We can incorporate that into a grass system. And so the smother system, we spend a fair amount of time during the establishment component helping them realize where is it that they can replace the forage that they're lost. Somebody asked earlier about one of the challenges to the incorporation of this. One of the ones we also see in our survey is the loss of land use. In that, and we would many times say, well, the smother crop provides forage that you would normally get in that system, where many people will suggest the loss of land occurs actually during the winter and the following spring while the seedlings are still getting established. And so that is part of the challenge The smother systems do a good job of providing forage. Addressing that fall and winter is a bit more of a challenge. From a education standpoint, then we spend a fair amount of time on actually getting the seed in the ground, and several minutes talking about the date of seeding specific to our region, as well as the rate. I will say that when we kind of started this and we had the seed companies in the room, we thought there would be a fair amount of debate as to rate. At the end of the day, our goal is to get seed in the ground, and it was very much agreed upon that the recommended seeding rate for tall fescue in Missouri was acceptable. You can put whatever you want on your seed bag, but we would say, from an alliance perspective, our education is at the tall fescue seeding rate for the state. And then one of the things we do emphasize as it relates to seeding is that seeding is done with a drill. There will be a fair amount of discussion amongst the producers in the school that we have had as to whether broadcast methods are appropriate, and we remind them our goal is success, not just getting seed strung out there. And so we spend a fair amount of time on the methodology, so much so as we go through a seed calibration exercise. And that is where we take the time to teach them how to calibrate the drill, what that entails, so that ultimately they get the appropriate seeding rate planted. So then the next thing that we talk about is economics, and Wesley Tucker and myself have done this, and we've modified this in a number of different ways. But one of the things that I have tried to do in this economic discussion is to make it output focused. And the reason I say output focused is as soon as you say it costs $120 an acre to establish it, there will be 25 different producers in the room that will raise their hand and say, I can do it for $100, or it's going to cost me $150, and that becomes their barrier to entry. And so from an output standpoint, what I try to do is say, here is the increase in conception rate, here is the increase in average daily gain, and when I do that, I use an average as well as a range. And so that average gives them a performance improvement to base their decision on, but the range also says, here's best and worst case scenario. And they can then apply their economics to this and say, well, I can save money here from a cost standpoint, increase performance there. One of the things that we spend time on relative to making the conversion is what are the key production variables. And the number one factor influencing whether it is economically viable to convert to novel endophyte is stocking rate. The more cattle that pasture influences, the more economically important it is. And so we go through the discussion of, how many cattle, cows, stocker cattle, are going to be influenced by this pasture, and ultimately that helps determine whether it is economically viable. Economics are then addressed a bit later in the producer panel as well. One of the things that you know is, as from an educational standpoint, it does help to get up out of your chair and get out and about from time to time. And so at each of the school locations, we do have a plot where all of the fescue varieties that are available, as well as Kentucky 31 and an endophyte-free variety, are planted side by side in replicated plots. And they're all this is the one that Craig showed from FSRC. This is the one we just established at Columbia. And so this is where we get the opportunity to go out in early March, see the status of the plots, talk about weed control options, fertilizer options, and just compare the forages side by side. And this is something that from a curriculum standpoint has been a nice opportunity to, one, get people out and actually see. And from an education perspective, the one thing that I like as much as anything is you can walk out there, and if you don't have a map in your hand, it's very hard to tell. And that helps illustrate the concept of the importance of testing and then the verification of the seed and the endophyte as well. So then the other aspect of the educational process that we go through is first year management, in that our goal really is to get seed in the ground and for that seed to persist long term. And so when we talk about first-year management, we talk about fertilization options, we talk about weed control methods, we talk predominantly, we emphasize that that first harvest early in the spring would be a hay crop. And that opportunity to allow that forage to go ahead and establish solidly before we provide any type of grazing pressure. And so that first year management, that's where we go through just kind of the mechanistic aspects of allowing those seedlings to develop. And then we also think a lot about long-term management. And this long-term management is much associated with producer questions and comments that have come up along the way, is that how then should we graze this? Okay, so very few of our clients that go through this process are able to convert the entire operation. Very few. And so what they have is they have a pasture of a novel endophyte, and then they have a pasture of native or infected. And so their primary concern at that point is, how do I keep from taking this to that and ultimately contaminating the stand? And so we talk about how to try to manage the grazing season from a standpoint of minimizing seed head appearances in your Kentucky 31 and ultimately transferring that via the animal. We talk about the data as it relates to the data where we see encroachment where there are bare spots in the Kentucky 31 and maintaining that novel endophyte stand. One of the other things that from a hay management standpoint I think is hard to fit in any other category that we talk about is, look, by no means am I pro harvest of crappy hay. Okay? But the one thing that a novel endophyte allows you to do is harvest hay in July without much concern. In that many of our producers will, they like to harvest yield as opposed to quality. And I like to joke, so you harvest a lot of manure and maximum endophyte. Okay? And so in this model, here's where you can tell a client that, like, look, you can allow that novel endophyte to get mature, go to seed, harvest it late, and you don't increase the risk of endophyte toxicosis. The other aspect of this hay management and long-term management we talk about is ultimately where these fields are selected, in that a haying model makes a reasonable amount of sense because now you have a place where you can apply 100, 150 units of nitrogen without cause for concern. You can increase the productivity per unit of land area. You can essentially feed that without risk of distributing toxins. And for many, it addresses this as a big concern. And this is a concern where if I have a novel endophyte pasture, that no longer can be a hay feeding area, right? Especially if they are in a purchased hay model, because wherever you feed hay, now you have inoculated it with 10,000 pounds of seed of whatever was in that bale of hay, and you have all these bare spots around that now become opportunistic places for infected plants to come. And so in our long-term management component of the education, we talk about land use opportunities, and that here's an opportunity where you may have to set land aside for 6 months, but long-term you have a broader application of that land. And also talk about you don't necessarily have to renovate the entire operation as well. So then one of the more entertaining parts of our discussion or educational process is, as Chris and Jerome have both experienced, is we allow the seed companies precisely 7 minutes. Craig does a very good job of making sure that no one goes over their 7 minutes, and I'd say they're fairly self-regulating of each other as well. And so all of the companies that have a novel endophyte variety get the opportunity to talk to the clients about what they have to offer, and to familiarize them with the product, with their variety choices, and provide promotional materials. And so the part about that that's maybe the most interesting is everyone is in the room at the same time. And so there's a fair amount of self-regulation in that nobody oversteps what actually can be claimed relative to the research that they've done. And this actually gives the producers the opportunity to put a face to the name with the product that they're looking to procure, and then ask questions beyond what we cover just from a educational perspective. Okay, and then I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this because Daryl's going to be up next to talk about his actual discussion. But we have a producer panel, and Daryl and Curtis and Justin are all on the board as well. But Daryl is a cow-calf operation, and he'll talk to you a bit more. And then, so that gives us the opportunity to combine the science with boots on the ground, and Daryl provides predominantly a cow-calf as well as a replacement heifer model in his discussion. And then Curtis Schallert has a backgrounding operation, and Curtis buys cattle from all over Missouri, Arkansas, and Kansas, and so he gives a perspective, because Curtis is not here, I'll go into his a bit more detail. He goes into a perspective of buying cattle that are ultimately bringing a fair amount of seed and any other number of challenges with them, and how he uses kind of a sacrifice area to get everything cleaned out and then moves them to a novel component. The interesting thing about having Curtis on the producer panel in the board is novel endophyte goes against two business components he has. In that one thing that his operation does is actually grow fescue seed, and the other one, Curtis has a custom ammoniation business as well. And so some of the management solutions that we would recommend for fescue toxicosis, Curtis offers that as a service, but also goes through his experience in that making fescue seed from a seeding standpoint as well. And then Justin Burns, I put him on here. He's offered a producer perspective a couple of times as well, and those of you who know Justin, he works for Barenberg now, but he talks about their cow-calf operation as well, and does that in a manner that gives again another cow-calf perspective without having his Barenberg hat on too much. So then kind of we wind up the day in that we hope through an educational process that we have gone through the process and the barriers that largely are presented by the producers, but we do have, Mark historically has done a discussion of what NRCS offers from an incentive standpoint, predominantly through the EQIP program, and takes the time to say, here's the program that you would apply for and specifically how you would go about doing it. And so with that, I just summarize in that, again, we have done this. We started out just in Mount Vernon and Linnaeus, and then to minimize the geographic challenges from a one-day travel school, we have tried to incorporate both Columbia and Cook Station, or our Wordak farm, to allow producers to be closer to home from a travel standpoint. And to date, it has, I think, has gone well. From a review standpoint, I think the biggest challenge that we have is still trying to overcome the barrier. From an educational standpoint, is overcoming the barrier. How do I not use that land for 6 months? That is one of the challenges we see from an evaluation standpoint. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Or Scott?